I'm Lynette Madison, and I'm with the NASA Johnson Space Center Public Affairs Office. I'm joined today by Norman Augustine, Chairman of the Review of U.S. Human Spaceflight Plans Committee. Mr. Augustine and his panel of experts held a public meeting today here in Houston. Tomorrow the committee will be at the Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, Alabama, holding a public meeting, and on Thursday at the Hilton in Cocoa Beach, Florida. The committee will present its results at the end of August to the administration. Mr. Augustine will begin today with a brief status report on the day's meeting, and then we'll have about 20 minutes of questions. But before he begins, I'd like to remind everyone of a few guidelines. Before asking your question, please be sure to give your name and your affiliation. And please remember to limit your inquiries so that we can get to everyone. And now I'd like to introduce Mr. Augustine.
Well, thank you, Annette, and good afternoon. Our committee has been assigned to provide to the White House and the NASA a group of options with regard to the human spaceflight program and to robotic missions that relate directly to the human spaceflight program. And as part of our efforts, the 10 of us have been traveling around the country visiting various locations, soliciting input from experts, for example, here at NASA's facility, and also from the general public. We've set up a website. We're getting a lot of regular mail. We're getting emails, and have had really an extraordinary response of interest in our work. We have 35 days remaining of the 90 days we were permitted to take this task on, and we're finding it a daunting task. Today was a very useful day. We have divided ourselves into several subcommittees, one of which deals with some issues relating to the existing program, namely the continuation of the shuttle and the continuation of the ISS. Other committees relate to transportation from Earth to low Earth orbit, and another relates to missions beyond low Earth orbit. And the final one is an integration group that's going to deal with issues of international cooperation, relationships with the Department of Defense, other federal agencies, commercial support of the human spaceflight program, so forth. Today we heard from the first of those committees, which was chaired by Sally Ride, and we had a chance to discuss that at some length. I think with that brief introduction, I would just say that we're on schedule. We have a lot of work yet to do. The committee has been very, very diligent, and we're trying to be very open-minded. We've not reached any conclusions at this point. That comes further downstream. But we are beginning to integrate an awful lot of input. So I think with that, we could turn to questions.
Right.
Eric Berger with the Houston Chronicle. So we learned today that Constellation may not realistically be ready until 2017. How does that square with your task of minimizing the spaceflight gap?
The spaceflight gap, of course, as the gentleman refers to, relates to the time between the final flight of the shuttle, whenever that is, and the first flight of Constellation or whatever vehicle comes into that time frame. And during that gap, which has been estimated to be around 5 years, we, the United States, will necessarily depend on others, namely principally the Russians, for transportation of our astronauts to the International Space Station. Concerns have been raised about that. Some people are not concerned with it, some are. And one of the things we've been asked to do is to see what could be done to minimize that gap. And today, we of course were told that it's likely that the space shuttle may not fly out its final 7 missions quite as quickly as been expected. That will tend to shorten the gap. We were also told that there would probably be delays in the Constellation system and possibly in some of the other options as well. And because of that, the gap probably is likely to extend beyond the 5 years. We also heard that it's very expensive and difficult to do much about that. And if we were to attempt to do something about it, it would probably take money that could otherwise be spent on missions beyond Earth orbit. So we face a very difficult trade-off as a country.
Questions? Do you have another question?
We also heard about a tension today between those who want a continuation of the shuttle a little bit in space in 2020 and those who wanted to press ahead of exploration and I think devote those funds to Constellation or some other program like that. What's your personal view on whether we should sort of be doing continuation or exploration?
You know, one of the things one quickly discovers about the human space flight program in particular is that there are strongly held views by people who are very committed on all sides, very dedicated, often very knowledgeable. But the views are very contentious, and they go all the way from should we have a space program at all? Should we have a human space program? Should the shuttle continue? Some say it shouldn't, some say it should. Same thing with ISS. There are those who believe that we should go to the moon. Others say Mars. Others say Phobos or Deimos or L1 or a near-Earth object. And I must confess there's a great deal of disagreement. We can't begin to afford to do all those things. And so we're going to have to make some hard choices. And that's part of the task of our committee, is to lay out in an organized fashion what those hard choices are. And the best I can say to the question of what's my personal opinion, frankly, I don't have one. I say that quite honestly. I must confess I came in with some beliefs. I wouldn't call them opinions. And I think, like many of the other members in the group, we've been changing our minds as we've learned more and more. And I think that's the case with myself. And so 35 days from now, I may have an opinion, but today, frankly, I'm still gathering data. And I think the greatest evidence of the fact that I don't have an opinion is that, if anything, I think my leanings have changed a bit back and forth as we've continued, and I don't think I'm unique among our group in that regard.
Can you say, sir, what your thoughts are about actually going to? Is it in your mind a necessary
Step.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of the question.
Is it in your mind a necessary step?
The question is whether we need to go to the moon. Is that a normal, necessary step to whatever we do beyond? And it's a good question. It's one of the questions that is very contentious and that we're going to need to offer some light on. Those who argue that we should go to the moon have several reasons. They include doing science on the moon. They include gaining knowledge on space operations. It includes using the moon as a waypoint to go beyond the moon. And it includes those who say that if we just set out for Mars or some such place, that it'll be so long before anything really happens that the public will lose interest in paying for the activities if they don't see any successes along the way. Then there are those who say we've been to the moon, going back to the moon isn't very interesting. Why would you do that? Even if we do, also that we haven't established any new capability for our country. And worse yet, we might have a failure on the way to the moon, in which case we would appear that we can't even do what we did 40 years ago. So that's kind of the arguments very quickly in a nutshell. We have work to do to try to illuminate that.
hearing what you did to space today? Program that has to give. Do you feel that the budget constraints are so much that somewhere something will have to be left?
You know, I really can't answer that question because only the president and the Congress can decide what the budget is. And I think one of the things that we have accomplished to date is that we initially were told that whatever options we offered had to comport with the existing budget. And we've obtained relief from that situation. Now, we've promised to provide at least two sensible options that fit the budget. But I think if there's anything we feel unanimously about, and that is that it's unfair to NASA, it's unfair to the country to give NASA missions and then don't back them up with a budget. And so we're going to do everything we can to avoid that trap. And if that means doing less and doing it well, so be it. But all those of us who care about space, of course, hope that wouldn't be the outcome. But in the end, it really will be the president primarily who has to make that decision.
Are there any other questions from the news media? Yes, go ahead. Thank you. Eric.
Eric Berger with the Houston Chronicle again. So you're in the heart of human spaceflight. Shuttle program, station program, constellation program are based here. A lot of people very worried, concerned about what your committee is doing, and sort of they're concerned about their jobs, and a lot of them have put a lot of time into human spaceflight. What sort of would you say to them? What message would you like them to have?
Well, I think, first of all, we appreciate the concern that our efforts raise. And most of us have spent our lives as engineers in space and aeronautics and in technical areas, science. As you know, we have 2 astronauts on our committee. And so we care too, and we know what it's like. We've all been out there ourselves when budgets were reviewed, and the best thing I can say is that we're going to do our level best to do our job professionally, to objectively lay out options, and to objectively say what we think those options will really cost. And hopefully the options will speak for themselves, and the President and the Congress will make a sensible decision. That really is about all I could say, other than that each of us appreciates what's been accomplished, particularly the organization here in Houston that can take such great pride in the things that were made possible in space over the years through their efforts. And I take my hat off to them. I've been here on many occasions in the control room when launches were taking place, or when the MMU was operating, and I know many of the people here personally, and all I can say is thank you for what you've done, and we'll do our best to do our job well.
Do you have another one? Are there any more questions? Well, if so.
Well, thank you all very much for your interest, and I should say a special thanks to NASA here in Houston and NASA in general for the terrific support that they've given to us with all their other responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Augustine. And for additional information on the committee, you can visit their website at hsf.nasa.gov. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good day.